Hello, this is Alexa Bennett, and this is my technology integration presentation. I chose the topic of podcasts for this project and why and how educators should use them in the classroom. I chose this because I have found that podcasts are very helpful when looking to gain some more information about a subject or topic, especially in the field of history and social studies, which I'm hoping to teach. So I thought this would be a great way to learn a little bit more about podcasts and how I can learn to incorporate them into my classroom. So first, here, I just wanted to review what a podcast is. Although they have really increased in popularity in recent years, sometimes people don't exactly know. So here, a podcast is an audio or video transcription of information that can be downloaded or streamed from a handheld device, laptop, or desktop computer. They exhibit many forms of communication. So this can be ranging from a nonfiction story to an interview to possibly a speech made 20 years ago that was recorded and then transmitted into a podcast. It can be conversational between two people or three people, even four. So there's many different ways that a podcast format can manifest, and which I find to be really interesting because you can get it in a lecture form or possibly a debate form, especially when considering a social studies topic. These might be great tools to use for our students and just to show them the variation of communication that is exhibited. So how can we as teachers incorporate a podcast into a lesson plan? Here, I outlined 5 ways that I've found through my research. One being an in-class activity, 2 as a supplement to classwork, as a way to be more inclusive to diverse learners, a review tool, and as a project. So I really enjoyed learning about these different ways that we could incorporate a podcast into a lesson plan. As an in-class activity, one example that I liked was a teacher would once a week would listen to a podcast, specifically Serial, and would put up the text on the board and have students all together follow along. And then they would go back and fill out a worksheet that was made up by the professor just to keep them on their toes and make sure that they're actively listening and retaining the information. Another way that I thought it might be a good idea to use a podcast is as a supplement to classwork. So oftentimes there will be, plans that don't include technology in the classroom, but maybe you want students to have a bit of background information on the topic, and this would be a great example where you can go through different podcasts and possibly post them to the Google Classroom or a blog or however you do share electronic information with students, and have them listen to it and gain some background information going into the next class. I also thought it was a great tool to use to be more inclusive for diverse learners, which I'll go into a bit later. Also as a review tool. So this can be seen anywhere from going into, a different podcast and, learning about the history of something, or possibly a biography of somebody, or, before a test or something of that nature. But also I thought it was very interesting that teachers could even record their own podcasts for each of their classes. So possibly maybe students who weren't in class one day, or maybe were a little bit fuzzy on one of the days in class, so days of instruction, you can record this information, make it into a podcast, and then students have that to go back to and use as a reference. And then finally as a project. So this means students would be making their own podcasts, which is, I think, a really great way to for students to demonstrate some creativity, and actually, a great way for them to learn a little bit more about public speaking and writing. And it's kind of like an interdisciplinary way of tackling a subject. So why are podcasts a good idea to incorporate into the classroom? For one, they're low cost and accessible. And by low cost, I mean most of them are free, and also accessible because you can find them, from anywhere that there's internet. Really. I do understand that there might be cases where students don't have access to internet, but in the case of the district that I'm hoping to work for, every student really, they do have access to Chromebooks. Each student does have access. So while I understand that maybe in different parts of the country, this might not be true, but at any rate, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to assume that this is something taking place in my school district. It provides information in an exciting way, which is one reason why I really enjoy podcasts myself. So it really, especially when exhibiting a story that students need to understand, or like a time period story where students can really feel some type of relation to the character, where they can empathize with the character, and that way they feel a little bit more of a connection to the subject matter. When stories are told through dialogue, it makes it more interesting for the student, and thus they're more likely to pay attention, rather than just spewing information at someone. They have context to it and why people may have done what they did, especially because they're learning or seeing it through the eyes of a character, possibly. Also, it's a different perspective for students. It can get boring listening to the same voice day after day, so it just offers a different, little change of pace. One thing I thought was interesting was that podcasts have been shown to improve critical thinking, listening comprehension, and literacy, especially as a classroom activity where students are all listening to the podcast together and reading along. Their brains are kind of forced to stay with the cadence of the podcast and are reading along. So it kind of improves that type of cognition. And also it gives them context to unfamiliar words and concepts. And then especially when given a text, they can go back and reread or re-listen to a part that they maybe didn't understand. So it gives them a little bit of reference. But also, as far as going to, learning new words and through context and through the podcast, this is something that's really positive for students because it promotes more self-esteem and self-efficacy, because they're able to get that immediate validation about something that they didn't know and then had learned. So it's a really great tool, I think, to use for students. How can podcasts promote inclusivity in the classroom? This I really loved, which is something I didn't even think about before doing research of this project. So for English language learners, through the using of podcasts and the text simultaneously, they're able to hear the pronunciation and the context of new vocabulary. So they're able to hear what these words are supposed to sound like, and then they will be able to increase their vocabulary, to increase or improve their pronunciation, and maybe even become more familiar with the colloquial type of speaking. So there's things that if anyone's ever learned a second language, you understand that reading it and hearing it as it's spoken is a completely different situation. For students with disabilities, students who have trouble hearing, they're able to adjust volume as they need and also have a visual aid. But with like the advent of headphones and these things, this might be a great alternative to standing to like someone speaking in a classroom where they maybe can't hear because there's outside sounds or things of that nature. It also would allow students who have difficulty seeing to give their eyes kind of a break and rely on a sense that's a bit more, a bit stronger. Also with differentiation. So podcasts, which I have noticed just through personal experience, they do have the ability to either increase speed or decrease speed of the audio. So if a student maybe can't read along as fast as what is the standard audio speed, they can decrease that speed and then go along at their own pace so they won't feel lost and have a little bit more time to grasp the concept. Alternatively, if a student is super speedy, they can increase the speed and then go as fast as they want. And so it kind of allows some more wiggle room. So one thing I thought was interesting and quite astonishing is that podcast listening of people between the ages of 12 and 24 has increased almost 50% in the last 2 years. This is a lot. So it's not only something that's gaining more popularity, but maybe if it's something that's popular in the mainstream or the students' day-to-day life, they're more likely to incorporate it into their daily lives. Maybe they're not a huge reader, but this is just another way for them to gain or gather some more information at something that they think is more fun and interesting and kind of like hip, I guess, which is kind of not a hip word, but anyway. And also, according to a study that I looked at as a reference point, Mohammed Merhi, he found that the students that he evaluated, that the students thought that podcasts were even better than their textbooks for revision purposes, and maybe it is because they found it both enjoyable and useful. So it kind of plays into what I had just previously mentioned, that when something's more fun and a little bit more interesting, students are going to gain a little bit more out of it. And this is kind of what I ended on for the 5 points that I made about how we can incorporate this into our classrooms a few slides back. But podcasts produced by students is also a great way to understand where students are at and their level of understanding of the information. But it's also like a really fun way for them even to research a topic. It's also good for students who maybe don't have the best time public speaking. So it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, and then they're able to gain more confidence in speaking aloud, and then maybe move forward with their public speaking skills later on. And finally, so because there are thousands of podcasts to choose from, teachers need to use their discretion when choosing podcasts for students. This could be time consuming depending on how many you want to incorporate or how long they are, but it's definitely the teacher's responsibility to thoroughly